How about you, Charlotte?
Yep, I think we're all good.
We're all good.
Everybody's here.
Yeah, we're now live.
Right. Oh, well, good morning, everybody. Can everybody hear me? I'm hoping that's in the affirmative.
Yes.
Andrew.
Yes.
So it's now 10 o'clock or just a minute or so past, and the examination hearings are now open. And my name is Mike Fox. In fact, as well as everybody hear me, am I clear in everybody seeing me as well? Have I got a reasonably good picture, if that's the right expression to use? So I'm just to introduce myself, Chartered Town Planner. I've been appointed by the Secretary of State to hold the examination into the legal compliance and soundness of the draft Mid-Sussex Site Allocations Development Plan document. That is the submission plan, which was dated July 2020. For brevity, I'll refer to the plan just as the plan on most occasions from now onwards. I'm sure we're going to be calling it the DPD as well, and maybe other things, but the plan will be fine. And everybody, please be aware that this session is being recorded and live streamed. It will be published as a recording. Is that on YouTube or on the internet, or on both?
It's being streamed on YouTube.
On YouTube, right. Thank you for that. So the hearing sessions that are taking place, get my mouse in order. The hearing sessions that are taking place today and over the next few weeks are part of the examination. This morning's session starts off the process for the next 3 or so weeks. It will cover introductions from myself and the council, and we'll go on to deal with matter 1 in the hearing programme, which is about legal requirements, the scope of the plan and duty to cooperate. We'll then move on to matter 2, covering the sustainability appraisal and habitats regulation assessments. And the hearings programme sets out when we'll be discussing which matters and which participants are due to take part. The hearings timetable sets out the programme for considering all the matters over the next 3 weeks. And if all goes to plan, the final day of the hearings will be Wednesday, the 16th of June. That depends to a large extent on everybody here and how much you talk and whether we need some contingency days. But if everything goes smoothly, Wednesday, the 16th of June should be the last day of the hearing sessions. Following the closure of the hearings, my next task is to prepare a report to the council with my conclusions and the action the council needs to take with regards to the soundness of the plan. On receipt of my report, the council should amend the plan in the light of the main modifications, or start again, depending on which conclusion we come to, and then move, if it's in regard to main modifications, then the council should respond to those issues raised and move swiftly to its formal adoption. The council remains open until I submit my report to the council. However, once the hearing sessions part of the examination is completed, I can receive no further information or statements from any party unless it is a matter that I have specifically requested. So I'm afraid it's one rule for me and one rule for you. So I can ask for more information, but from your point of view, once we finish the actual hearings, that's the end of submission of paper or documents by email, and any solicited items, unsolicited items will be returned. I'd like to welcome you all warmly and thank you for participating. These virtual hearings will run in a very similar way to physical hearings, but there will be some necessary adjustments. And let's just be patient with each other as we're all going through a learning process on this. I would say none more so than me. I have done a couple of Teams virtual hearings, but this is my first one on Zoom. So I'm very much in a learning process on this. Just to say that I will be taking notes during the hearings. That is notes longhand. I'm not clever enough to do it on a computer at the same time. And that does mean that I'll be lowering my head from time to time to actually write notes. And I don't want anybody to feel offended if I'm not looking at you face on when you're making what to you is a very important point. And I seem to be looking down at a piece of paper rather than looking directly at you. So I don't want that to in any way get in the way of your feeling that you're being heard and understood and being taken seriously. So to start with, can people please make sure their microphone is switched off or muted? However, I don't have a problem with participants having their cameras on. Not a problem to me. It may be to you, but it's not to me. So at this point in the hearing, I might, on a physical hearing, I would probably go around the table and I'd ask people to introduce themselves. That would be impractical here because of the virtual format and the number of participants. So instead, when you introduce yourself for the first time, please say who you are and please say which organization, if any. Obviously, you don't have to represent an organization. You're very welcome as an individual. But if you are representing an organization, I would like to know which one or which ones they are. And the program officer is Charlotte Glancy. You will have all spoken to Charlotte, I'm absolutely sure. If you have any queries about the examination, please email her, but you should find most answers, if you like, in answers to the frequently asked questions in my guidance notes, and they've been circulated for some time now. I'm also going to ask the council shortly to introduce their team when they make their opening statement. The agenda for the morning is the hearings timetable, which in turn is based on the matters, issues and questions discussion note. And the hearings timetable was sent out with the invitations and is also on the website. But if for any reason you don't have a copy, please email the program officer. Just a word about what the organisation is about, because I'm aware that you're coming at it from very different directions and standpoints. And some of you will be experienced professionals. Some of you will maybe never have been to one before. But the examination into the plan is looking at the legal compliance and soundness of the submitted plan. This is not the same, I stress, as whether the plan can be made better or perfect. It's whether the plan can be made sound. So once I've reached what I consider to be a soundness level, that's fine by me, as it were. We don't need to go on and try and make it better. If the council want to make it better, because there are various suggestions that are made during these hearings, that's for the council to suggest, maybe through a modification. But that's not my remit. I have to remind you of paragraph 35 in the framework, or the MPPF. That's the 2019 version that we're now working to. This sets out 4 tests of soundness. I'm just going to go through these 4 tests. The first is the plan needs to be positively prepared, which is concerned with meeting objectively assessed needs and unmet needs from neighbouring areas. Secondly, the plan needs to be justified, which means it must be an appropriate, evidence-based strategy, taking into account reasonable alternatives. Thirdly, it needs to be effective. That means it needs to be deliverable over the plan period. In advertising speak, it will be what it does what it says on the tin. And fourthly, the plan needs to be consistent with national policy. it should be in accordance with the policies of the National Planning Policy Framework and planning law. So those are the 4 tests that I assess this plan by. And I start with the presumption that the council considers that the plan is fundamentally sound, unless it is shown to be otherwise as a result of the evidence presented to me in written representations and statements or at the hearings. Therefore, those seeking changes to the plan have to demonstrate that the plan is not sound, and also they need to suggest the changes sought in order to address any soundness issues. So it's no good just saying to me, I don't like policy so-and-so. I want to know what you would want in its place. Does that policy need to be improved in some way? Or does that policy need to be deleted? And if so, does another policy need to go in its place? So the examination isn't just about the hearings. It includes a consideration of the wide range of written documents and representations. I've read all the relevant documents, which is quite a challenge, but I've done it. And I've read all the hearing statements. I should like to thank the council and the participants for all the evidence that you have submitted. The written statement has already been provided me with enough information on some subjects, the written material. The hearings will simply focus on the matters that I want to hear more about. So I want to say a word about site visits. I've already travelled around mid-Sussex, caught the good weather last week, and I've done my best to familiarise myself with the key issues and sites, so as to place in context representations made during the hearings. If any additional site visits need to be ones which are accompanied, i.e. you want me back there again with members of the public, then I will need to have a council representative with me. And we'll possibly get more onto this as we go through the hearings. However, if you feel that there are important reasons why I should go to a specific place, please email the programme officer in the first instance, who will liaise with the council, who will put together an itinerary of accompanied visits for me. As I say, I'm not asking for that. I'm just saying that is a facility or a possibility if people feel that would help. And I want to explain how the hearings will work. We'll go through each question on my MIQ discussion note. I will lead the hearing, the discussion. I will ask the questions and I'll invite people one at a time to contribute to the discussion. And responses should be directed to me. The purpose is for me to gain the information that I need. Often I will start with the council and I will ask them to explain the reasons why they have approached a policy in a particular way. But I may go to another of the participants first if they have raised a specific matter I want to explore. Once we've got going on a topic, if you want to contribute, please will you use what on Zoom is called the reaction, what most people refer to as is the raise hand facility, to indicate your desire to speak. And I will give you the opportunity. If you don't have a reaction facility, please let the programme officer know, or if it's not working, as we just heard with one participant, I'm quite happy for somebody else to sort of stand in as proxy on that. That's not a problem to me. Only one participant, of course, may speak at a time. So please keep your mic off until you are invited to speak. If I need to explore something in more detail, I may open up a discussion, but it doesn't help me or ultimately you if you interrupt. So please don't do that. There will be no cross-examination or cross-table discussion. There are a lot of issues to consider. So please, can you make your contributions brief and focused? and don't repeat points already made, or at least try not to. I'm okay with, I agree with what Mr. Brown or Mr. Smith has said, or Miss whoever, but I don't want you then to go into the reasons and repeat basically what the previous person has said. And you don't need to speak, of course, on every question, and you don't need to go through your case in detail, because as I've said, I've read all the representations and statements. When you finish speaking, please make sure you turn your mic off and lower your hand. If you've already spoken on a particular topic, but believe you can help further on the subject, you can raise your hand again, but don't raise your hand, as I say, simply to repeat what others have said or register you don't agree. I've got the point. I will have got it if you don't agree with somebody else. You don't need to worry about that. And a point I always make is making a point 10 times doesn't make the point 10 times stronger. So once you've said a point, that's absolutely fine. Make it clear, make it a clear point, make it clearly, but not 10 times. Please make sure you're free of distractions such as phones and household deliveries, and ensure that no one else appears on your camera. And I may just like to warn you, I have a fairly loud dog, and in my last examination, she forgot that she's in a no barking zone, and it was a bit of a problem. I'm hoping we don't get this time. Please make sure you attend the hearing sessions from start to finish and avoid leaving the screen except during breaks. On the subject of breaks, I aim to have a mid-morning refreshment break, probably around 11:30 for maybe 20 minutes or so, an hour's lunch break at around 1 o'clock. And if we're still going by 3:30, we'll have another break then. I'm aiming to close sessions by 5 o'clock at the latest. So I'm hoping we can keep to that. Otherwise, I think we're just going to start to lose concentration. It won't be as valuable anyway. Right, an important point to remember, from tomorrow onwards, I intend to open the hearing sessions at a different time. I'm aiming to start tomorrow and every other day after that at 9:30. And that's really to increase our efficiency. So please be prepared for this. A word about the examination and documents. The examination website is the key. All the documents for this examination are on the website and available for everyone to see. And I think it's an easy to use one. I don't always say that, but it is on this occasion. And I use the website myself as the go-to place for documents. I won't accept new documents from now on uninvited. I feel that disadvantages other parties who've gone by the rules. If I do invite the submission of a new document from something that's arisen during the discussion, maybe a statement of common ground, for example, then it should be emailed straight to the programme officer so that she can put it on the website. Because we handle documents in this way, there are 3 key points I just want to make. First of all, there'll be no screen sharing. Secondly, don't hold up any documents to the camera. And the chat facility must not be used under any circumstances. Now, I know that's a big thing with Teams. I'm not quite sure whether Zoom actually has that, but that's showing my ignorance, I guess. The hearings will be available on YouTube, and there's a link to that in the examination web page. Okay, in terms of my style, the way that I go through examination hearings, I occasionally express views and conclusions as we go through. This can take some getting used to for those who are accustomed to public inquiries. If I think there are problems, maybe in soundness terms, for example, or further work is required to make a plan sound, I will say so. Preferably at the hearings, maybe within a day or two with an interim letter. I would say about 50% of my examination hearings I do actually resort to interim letters at some stage or another. You might be relieved to know that in over about 35 examination hearings that I've done on local plans, I've only ever had one council that's withdrawn. So pretty good chances that we should survive that. And of course, I'd like the council to put forward their schedule of potential changes or modifications. This is a living document, and this is likely to be added to. Most councils, in my experience, will think of things which they feel will help in the soundness area, and will make those suggestions to me. And we'll keep up to date with that during the hearings. If it can help if the council and other participants can try to identify the wording of the main modifications for discussions during the hearings, as I say. And the council should be clear on what modifications are required, although some additional work on precise wording is normally required. Any proposed main modifications will require consultation. That's normally a 6-week period, and may require further sustainability appraisal. I say those of you experienced with the process will know this. And then at the end of the examination, I will produce a report. This report will recommend main modifications that are required to make the plan sound. The council will normally adopt them. If they don't, the plan won't be sound and cannot be adopted. It will be useful for this discussion if we can have the council statements on matter 1, scope of the plan and the duty to cooperate, and the matter 2 statements on sustainability appraisal and habitats regulation assessment to hand. That would be very useful, obviously in the submitted document as well. I ought to say at this point that a wide range of views have been put forward, unsurprisingly, I guess, in the representations, both in response to the draft plan and to my MIQs, that's my matters, issues and questions, over a wide range of planning topics in Mid Sussex. I'll ensure that everyone has the opportunity to speak. I say this, and I'm never quite sure how it goes down, but I'll say it nonetheless. I think that everybody in one sense is on the same side, in that you all want the best for Mid Sussex. That's what I'm taking as gospel. You all want the best for Mid Sussex. And it helps me if, by deferring to each other, and I will let everybody come in and have their say, then I will be in the best position to actually write a report that's in the best interests of Mid Sussex. So I just say that as my own little piece of homespun, could say the word wisdom, experience maybe. I have to ask the council now a few formal questions. I imagine will this be you, Andrew? Will this be Andrew Marsh? I have 6 questions here to ask you, official questions for the council to confirm. The first of them is, has the plan been prepared in accordance with the local development scheme?
Yes. Yes.
That's probably all I need for all of them, is just a yes. The second one is, has the plan been prepared in general accordance with the statement of community involvement and public consultation requirements?
Yes.
Has the plan been subjected to a sustainability appraisal?
Yes.
Has it been prepared in accordance with national policy?
Yes.
Has the plan been prepared in accordance with a habitats regulation assessment and with its conclusion taken into account?
Yes.
And the final question, has the plan been prepared in accordance with the duty to cooperate?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So also, I need to just ask, and you don't have to answer me immediately on this one, Andrew or anybody else, but is the council aiming to submit a formal request under section 27C of the Act for the inspector to recommend main modifications in the event that these are considered necessary by the inspector to make the plan sound?
Yes, in our submission to you, sir, we made that request in letter form.
Thank you. Just before the council starts, I would like to say that I consider the submitted plan to be clearly prepared, clearly presented on the whole, which has made it easy for me as an outsider, because you might have guessed by the way I talk that I come from nowhere near Mid Sussex, but it's made me as an outsider, it's helped me to get to know Mid Sussex. I would also like to thank all those parties who have prepared statements of common ground, which can be very useful documents and which can save valuable time. I would like to thank the council for their punctual and detailed responses to all the questions I've put to them so far. And this has been, it's already contributed to the efficient working of this examination. And I'd just like to ask at this point, are there any procedural questions that anybody has? If the answer to that is that there aren't any at this stage, I would just like to introduce, I'd just like the council now, if they could make any introductory points and to introduce their team. So I don't know who's going to do that, but it's over to the council.
Sir, it's my task to do that. We haven't met. My name is Paul Brown. I'm Queen's Counsel.
Oh, we have met. We have met over lunch on one occasion.
Indeed, I think at one of the planning inspectorate training sessions, sir.
Absolutely.
But, in the context of this examination.
Thank you.
So good morning to you, and on behalf of the council, can I welcome you and all other participants to this examination. You referred to the good weather you had last week for your site visit. I'm genuinely sorry we can't welcome you all in person because it continues outside today. There we are. So over the course of the examination, I'm going to be accompanied and assisted by an experienced team from the council. I might ask three of them just briefly to turn their cameras on while I introduce them this morning. First of all, heading up the team, I have Chris Tunnell, the Director of Planning at Arup, and Andrew Marsh, who is the lead for planning policy at Mid Sussex. And so also in terms of today's discussions, you're likely to hear from Alice Henstock, who's a Principal Planning Officer with the Council. So on different days with different topics, there may be one or two others who come into the frame as well. If so, I think I'll introduce those on the particular day rather than trying to do it now. But in terms of today, it's me, Mr. Tunnell, Mr. Marsh, and Ms. Henstock. So just by way of introduction, and I know we've got a lot to get through today, so I don't want to spend too long, but I think it's important to say that Mid Sussex is proud of its status as a high-performing local planning authority with an excellent track record. That's not just us, sir, it's borne out by the statistics. We determine 100% of major applications within agreed timeframes. Our housing delivery test result for 2018 was 111%, for 2019 was 96%. Since the adoption of the district plan in 2018, our track record in terms of determining, not just determining, but maintaining decisions of appeal has improved dramatically, as one might expect once one has a 5-year housing land supply in place. Last year, only 15% of appeals were allowed. We've got, we believe, an excellent relationship with site promoters and developers, which gives us an understanding of their issues, and the council takes every opportunity to support acceleration, the delivery of planned development. So as I've just said, the council adopted its district plan in 2018, as well as establishing a spatial strategy, which was supported at the time by both stakeholders and the community. That plan allocated strategic development sites at Burgess Hill, the Pease Cottage, and at Hassocks for nearly 6,000 homes. And since that time, excellent progress has been made in bringing those sites forward, with delivery already beginning to happen on the ground. However, in adopting the district plan, the council committed to allocating more sites to meet the housing number identified by your colleague, Jonathan Bohr, in the examination of the district plan. Since then, the council has worked hard to produce a site allocations development plan document. And so it is worth stressing at this stage, I know it's a matter that we'll come back to this morning and in the days to come, but the site's allocation plan is a daughter document to the district plan. We are aware of a number of parties who believe that it should go further, but from the council's perspective, its purpose is to give effect to the district plan, in particular by allocating additional sites to meet the housing requirement as set out in DP4 of the district plan. And so that meets the council's aim of ensuring the district can deliver plan-led development. This examination in public is of that work, which aims to protect the district from unwanted and unplanned speculative development. Of course, planning for sustainable growth never stops. The council is already revising the district plan. A call for sites has been carried out. Additional evidence on affordable housing, gypsies and travellers and C2 need has been commissioned. The council's intention is to carry out the Regulation 18 consultation on that new district plan this autumn, with a view to submission to the inspectorate in 2023. And so I hope you will agree with us that that demonstrates the council's commitment to plan-led sustainable development. To ensure that the council continues to facilitate sustainable growth in the right places, supported by the necessary infrastructure, it's critical that the site allocations DPD is adopted as soon as possible. The council, for its part, is satisfied that the DPD has been robustly prepared in accordance with the requirements of the NPPF, with planning practice guidance and best practice. It builds resilience in both housing and employment to deliver sustainable growth. So we've submitted this document for examination, confident that all the requirements of the NPPF and the council's statement for community involvement have been met. Of course, the purpose of this examination is to test whether that is the case, and we look forward to engaging in discussion with you and all the other participants over the next couple of weeks on those issues. So by way of introduction, that's all I plan to say at the moment, unless you have any questions. Thank you very much for the opportunity to welcome, and let's get on with it.
Thank you. You're commendably brief. Thank you for that. So we will start with matter 1, and we're looking at the legal requirements, the scope of the local plan and duty to cooperate. And I'm not going to go through every single question in great detail, but I will very briefly summarize what people have said as a kind of a scene setter. And so in legal requirements, in the first part of that, I asked whether the document that we're looking at now, the development plan document, meets all its legal requirements. The council's response, which I'll summarise very briefly, is that yes, it has. It's completed a self-assessment. It's kept the local development scheme up to date. It's had full community involvement, and it's got a full suite of consultation documents made available on the council's website. It also refers me to the operation of the members working group and the committee reports and legal aspects as well. Bott and Wilmore are saying that in their view that there are differences with national policies and advice, in particular in relation to older persons' dwellings, and I'm sure we'll get into that later. Stephen Sturgeoner states that they reminds me that the NPPF requires great weight to be given to any adverse impact onto AONB development. And of course, Mr. Sturgeoner, I will bring you in fully when we talk about Ardingly SA25 on a week on Thursday. But you make that point as a kind of a headline, and that's fine. The Infrastructure First group argue that there are clear inadequacies in notification and in the consultation exercise, and that in their view, many people have been unaware of the consultation exercise of the plan. In their view, there's been no early or effective engagement with significant sections of the community. So those are the the written summary of the written statements. I don't know if the council or Andrew Marsh has anything you just want to say by way of introduction that perhaps I missed out, or you want to stress before I bring other people in.
Marsh and I are looking at each other and wondering who should leap in, so I'm going to get there. So I think in many respects, our position on this has been covered by the answers that Mr. Marsh gave to your 6 questions. I'm not going to go through the background detail to those, but just for your note and for those of others, I mean, we've set out a written response to your questions under main matter 1. It's document MSDC02A. But so and that refers you to a number of other documents that the council has prepared along the way, but of particular relevance to the first questions under your main matter 1. So you've also got the council's local plan legal compliance checklist, which is DPD4, and you also have a duty to cooperate statement, which is DC1. And those effectively put flesh on the bones of the answers that Mr. Marsh gave you a moment ago. I think probably at the moment it is more helpful for you to hear from others why they disagree with the assertion that we have complied, rather than for me to go through the detail of what we have and haven't done. And I see Mr. Marsh nodding at me as well, so that's helpful.
You're in agreement, that's good. I wonder if infrastructure first, who do I have representing infrastructure first this morning?
So good morning, can you hear me okay?
Good morning, yes, so I've got Juan Lopez, yeah?
That's right, Juan Lopez on behalf of, I'm a planning barrister on behalf of Infrastructure First.
The floor is yours, Mr. Lopez.
Thank you, sir, good morning. Can I deal firstly then with matter 1, Roman 1, insofar as the statement for community involvement conveys various ambitions on behalf of the council, which we say have not been met, and which engage with the statutory duty. So you'll be well aware of that and how that overlays with the regulation. Can I deal with it by way of shorthand commentary, because you will have read already my action group's matter statement. And if I draw, sir, to your attention various paragraphs of that to set the scene, as it were, fairly briefly. So if you have that to hand, you'll see at 1.2 various principles of the principles that you'll find at page 5 of the council's statement of community involvement. Can I say straight away, there's no complaint or query being made about the adequacy of those principles as they're set out, but can I draw your attention to 3 of them? Principle number 1, as we set down, be timely. Principle number 2, be inclusive. And principle number 6, if I can make an addition to the statement of 1.2.1, being clear about results. So incorporating the duty common sense fashion to convey transparently and in full, so that the reader can objectively ascertain the evidence base to found out any asserted compliance with the statement for community involvement. So that sets the scene as against the council's own policy statement. There is over the page, so I'm now on page 2 of my client group's statement, a very comprehensive exercise of having gone through, and it's supported in evidence by historic emails sent between various members and council officers, I'll turn to in a moment, the forms of dissemination and notification that may or may not have been used. And I have to frame it loosely that way, because if you look to 1.4a, it takes you to Mid Sussex Matters magazine. And as a matter of fact, what the council confirm, although they suggest that it wasn't available for their use because the periods for consultation that they had elected did not coincide with the publication dates for Mid Sussex Matters magazine. Now, you'll be aware from your reading, so that the readership of Mid Sussex Matters magazine is particularly significant, and we frame it, we think, fairly at 73,000 households. That's not a figure or a distribution that I understand to be queried by the council. And finger in the page time, sir, on 1.4, page 2. If you then turn to, please, the second email enclosed within Appendix A, where we had historically written to the officer responsible for comms, or at least communicating the extent of comms, asking them as a matter of fact, which is how it should have read to the officer. I think they sought to deal with it in the same fashion. As a matter of fact, which outlets have been used, please? That was the question that was being asked there. But the answer is, I will say, vague and inadequate in terms of meeting or engaging those three principles. So perhaps more on point, principle 6 actually, in terms of being transparent to the reader about what has been, which means of publication and notification has been used. So the answer is then given. If you look at the email, second email, Appendix A, bottom of the first page before it cuts off, the press releases are distributed to the following, and then it provides a list of the outlets, but that is not, as we read it, a factual statement to confirm what has and has not taken place. That really is a checklist of media that could have been used as if hypothetically. And we know that because if you look down to the end of the list, you'll see the first main paragraph then turning to Mid-Sussex matters, whereby, so the point I was raising about the council's election not to pursue any publication in Mid-Sussex matters bore upon their view that because it didn't coincide with their chosen publication dates, then it shouldn't be used, DPD publication dates. And you'll see that confirmation in the last line, penultimate paragraph. You'll see it was not therefore possible to include within the Mid-Sussex matters publication, as on, I think, everyone's evidence, that is by far and away the most comprehensive source for alerting those within the locality to the DPD process to come. Now, on the issue of whether or not it was open to the council properly in conjunction with the statutory duty to say we're not going to use Mid-Sussex matters as a publication because it doesn't coincide entirely with the publication or consultation periods, we say that that was irregular and inadequate. So it would have been open to the council perfectly, and we haven't received an answer to this, still less any justification, to precede the consultation period that the council had elected and advertise the fact of the DPD consultation coming up. So in effect, the Mid-Sussex matters publication would have trumped or come before the first consultation period. And that would run both in relation to Reg 18 and the Reg 19 periods. We don't see why that would have been out of hand for the council to pursue it in that way. And that would have met the complaint that we were making, or the observation we were making, that this was by far and away the most open and clear forum for the council to pursue. So that question, it's quite a considerable question in relation to our submission, still remains unsatisfied, because it's simply not answered by pointing to the fact that the consultation period didn't bite until after the relevant publication for the Mid-Sussex matters outlet. But further and above that question is which of the other outlets that you see listed within the second email, see Appendix A, to our representation, were as a matter of fact deployed at which given stage. That there simply is, we say, no evidence base in front of you, nor any clarification, even if it were simply a bald statement. We wouldn't be satisfied by that. See Principle 6 of the SCI from the council to say on what basis consultation was advertised. And so there is a substantial complaint and observation to be made here. See our representation 1.5, where we list for you, having conducted our own comprehensive survey of the membership of the group and others, which of and in what proportion of those who reside within the area have been unaware of the consultation. And we've taken it from the appropriate stage, so CR 1.5.2 in relation to the Reg 18 consultation, And you will see there's some fairly high numbers in terms of those who, as a matter of fact, have been unaware of the process. And so from our perspective, we do launch from an evidence base of our own to point to a substantial body of local residents, be those infrastructure first members or others, and it's not limited to our group, you'll see, have been unaware at the relevant time, as a matter of fact, of the consultation process. And we say, as a result of that, that they were unable and necessarily substantially disadvantaged from partaking within the Reg 18 consultation process. Now, I don't know, having read the council's evidence-based documents, but I'll deal with those in short fashion, if I may. You've got the statement of consultation, of course, C1, your reference, the consultation report C3, also looking to paragraph 1.4 on the SCI itself, and also for your pen, see Appendix 3, that's page 17 of the 83-page document that is the statement of consultation. And so I can't see anywhere within those evidence-based documents, indeed all of them, that are dealt with within shorthand fashion C, please, on the council's matter 1 statement. My eye was drawn to paragraph 1.5 on the statement of community involvement. This final line within paragraph 1.5C, council's statement 1, with MSDC -02A, the main consultation methods to be used included. And so you'll note the way it's put again, and then only 4 bullet points there are listed. It's broad fashion. There's no evidence base to explain to you or tell us as a matter of fact when and at which stage, whether Reg 18, 19 or both, or any bookend dates being given for any of these media outlets having been, as a matter of fact, used. And then there's a further difficulty, which I highlighted upon earlier. If you take those 4 bullet points together, and then you try to cross-reference them to the comms email, that second email, CR Appendix A, to our matter statement, how and to what extent each of these have actually been used as a matter of fact. And so you can work your way through the statement 1 response all the way through to, well, I think it really ends at paragraph 1.9, so that's page 2 of the council statement. And respectfully, in my submission, sir, my observation, you are left without any confirmation as a matter of fact, still less, and it is a separate matter, see principle 6 of the SCI, any evidence base adequately to confirm which media outlet has been deployed at each given stage. Again, bookend dates I would expect to see in relation to Reg 18 and Reg 19 consultation, in order to meet with or provide you with an evidence base to then suggest, if the council are making or maintaining this submission, that they have met with their statement. So on that basis, we have explored all of the evidence-based documents that the council put forward, and I was rather looking forward to hear from the council in amplification of their matter statement, paragraph 1.5 in particular, for any answers in relation to the queries that were being raised by Infrastructure First. Further observations, so that you'll be keen to satisfy yourself of, is that these observations, perhaps levying them too high to render them complaints at this stage at least, but these observations were being raised with the council at the first opportunity. And it's slightly disappointing, we say, that the council haven't engaged with them or made themselves clear in terms of which of the outlets and which strategies for consultation they sought to explore. And so do respectfully take it as read that we've exhausted the evidence base such as it stands as presented by the council. So there you have it in outline, by way of introduction. You have a substantial objection by reference to the number, the sheer figure given at our 1.5 of those who, as a matter of fact, were simply unaware of the Reg 18 consultation having commenced, and by reason of that were unable naturally to partake within it. A number of those were then subsequently notified, but only by reason of the fair means of infrastructure first doing the notifying, if you like. The media outlets, as a matter of fact, remains one large question mark in terms of those which were actually deployed. That's a different question from saying, hypothetically, which were the outlets that were open to the council to use. And then you have the subset observation of particular concern to us is why the most glaringly obvious tool to be used, Mid Sussex Matters, and I don't understand that to be a matter of factual query between the parties. I think the council readily acknowledged that. Why, as a matter of fact, that wasn't used, if we are able to sidestep, as we say that we can, this issue of coalescence between consultation windows and the publication window for Mid Sussex Matters. It simply doesn't make any sense to us why Mid Sussex Matters publication couldn't have preceded the fact of the first consultation period taking place. Can I just address you very briefly then on 1.73 of our statement, just bypassing the prejudice points. So you'll see just very light touch at 1.72 Kendall. Kendall, you'll be aware, is and remains one of the most on-point authorities dealing with the adequacy of compliance with the statutory duty and with the regulation. In that case, you'll know that that didn't result in a quash at first instance, and it did end at first instance. Kendall actually appeared in that matter on behalf of the local authority. But what the court had to say in terms of hearing concerns, as if at an irrationality stage, is not, of course, the same perspective, the same lens through which you explore and seek the answers in terms of the integrity of the consultation process. So I raise that as one of the most on-point authorities as it remains on SCI and compliance, but nonetheless you'll gauge that was dealing with things at the irrationality level. So turning to 1.73 very briefly, and the penultimate line, we do say there and maintain, having seen what the council say in their matter statement, a failure to use specific measures, note the plural. It doesn't end with Mid Sussex Matters, see Appendix A, second email. You can work your way through the raft of the outlets, media outlets. None are rejected in principle as being objectionable by the council. We don't have a short list, still less do we have the evidence base to make out those which were actually used. So it's both, if you like, a procedural and substantive complaint / objection in relation to your matter 1, Roman 1, sir.
Thank you. I will come back to the council on these points in a moment or two. I will just ask if one or two other people wish to make their comments on these matters. I wonder if Stephen Surgener, there's something you'd like to say, providing we don't get into Ardingly, if we could just talk about the broad principles. Can I bring you in?
He's not actually participating in this session.
Right, in that case, we can't have him. What a shame. Is there anybody else who would like to make comments on this matter before I put the points back to the council? Right. It looks, Mr. Lopez, you're on your own on this as far as this particular meeting is concerned, but let's just go through these points again. What, if I've understood correctly, the council could help me with is I think a fairly obvious question of if Mid Sussex Matters is a well-used, well-read, well-circulated journal within Mid Sussex, with 73,000 households on its distribution list. It seems to me that would be a no-brainer to use them. Failing that, which other media outlets were deployed? I think it would be helpful if I had a list of those, and you don't have to get into this minute, but it would be helpful to have a list of those. That's the second thing. The point about the unawareness of people in 0.15 of Infrastructure First Statement 15.2, where 85% were unaware. And I'll bring you in a minute, Mr. Barnby, on this one. Just let me finish while I'm in flow, and then I'll hand over to you before the council answer. There's also the allegation made there's been little engagement, and that this particular group, Infrastructure First, have been wanting to debate issues with you since Regulation 18, and they say they've been unsuccessful in managing to beat a path to your door. Is that true? And if so, why? And the failure to use the specific measures that are mentioned in paragraph 1.7.3. So I think there's an allegation of batting the ball back rather than answering the questions. There's an allegation that you've been too vague. There's a survey result that many people are unaware. And I just really would like your comments on those. Before you do that, I will bring Mr. Barnby in, who's now raised his hand. Mr. Barnby.
Yes, thank you, Inspector. I'd just like to support what Mr. Lopez has been saying. I've been involved in Mid-Sussex planning for since about 2002, between 2002 and 2004. And the sites at East Grinstead on Imborne Farm and the Fellbridge were subject to the East Grinstead Area Action Plan. And at that time, during the consultation process, 7,000 people responded on those sites, mostly opposing it. And I just note that on this occasion, where basically the proposals are very similar, albeit rather smaller, they've had less than 1,000, I think, responses to the document. I may not have that figure exactly right. And I'd also just like to draw your attention to the fact that the council has historically said that the local development scheme is the principal way in which the members of the public should be able to follow what the process that's going on and how to engage with it. And I'd just like to draw your attention to the fact that whilst it's true that there has been a local development scheme in place throughout the process, on examination, I think you'll find that the local development scheme was drifted away from for no doubt reasonable matters, but it was only after the event that the local development scheme was corrected. So effectively it reported what actually happened rather than advise in advance what was going to happen. And so I would argue that the engagement hasn't been particularly timely or effective. And I'd also, just as on an anecdotal level, point to, I raised with some people who I knew from the earlier consultations on the Area Action Plan, a number of people who had been involved, and they were completely unaware of the of either the Regulation 18 or 19 consultations. So that's my contribution.
Thank you, Mr. Barnby. I don't know if it's Mr. Brown I referred to now. Just before, is anybody else who would like to say anything on this, who's perhaps been a bit slow in putting their hand up, but would like to? Anybody else? No, we're still short of takers on this, really. Right, okay, is this Mr. Brown?
Mr. Marsh, champing at the bit, sir, so I'm going to let him deal with this.
Mr. Marsh.
Thank you, sir. I'll deal with them in order. In terms of the press releases, quite helpfully, the list of outlets that we distribute our press releases to, which is a council, a corporate communications team, of course, and as a local authority, we release press releases very frequently. So it's a tried and tested list of outlets, and quite helpfully provided for us in the email exchange in the as an appendix in the Infrastructure First statement to you. And that lists all the TV outlets, radio stations, newspapers, news agencies, magazines and websites. Of course, we send out the press release. We have no control over what those outlets decide to publish, but we are aware of certainly Mid-Sussex Times as a local newspaper has published. And in addition to that, really, our there is a link in our Regulation 22 statement, which is document C1. There is a link and the dates there, which list where various documentation was provided, including a footnote link to our website, which includes all of the council's press release information, and there's a specific link to the one that was sent on the Regulation 18 and Regulation 19 consultations there. So that's dealing with the press release side of things. Obviously, in addition to that, we have our social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, and the like, which have got a large following and the ability to be shared as well. And we note that our releases on those channels have been shared, in particular by the Infrastructure First group, and reference Reg 19 most certainly, so that not only our followers, but other groups, interest groups, followers are also able to hear by word of mouth in that respect. In terms of Mid Sussex Matters, yes, it's a council's corporate publication. It's just distributed 3 times a year, spring, summer and winter. That's to a regular schedule. That's the corporate schedule, and deals with all council matters. It is delivered to every household in the district. And again, that the email correspondence between Infrastructure First and myself, we do admit, yes, it would be helpful if the consultation periods line up, that we advertise our consultation in that manner. However, on this occasion, we note that Regulation 18, in order to have been publicised in the summer edition, that was distributed on the 15th of July, a copy deadline at least a month before that. The Regulation 18 Sites DPD actually didn't go to council for final approval until September that year. So at least 3 to 4 months after the copy deadline for that magazine. And as we note, the next edition was after the consultation closed, so that wasn't appropriate. With Regulation 19, things obviously a bit more complicated here with COVID, for instance. Copy deadline was the 6th of July, the distribution date was 6th of July. And due to the very short notice in re-emerging from COVID with our virtual council meetings, it was relatively short notice for us to get onto the council agenda, and that didn't go on the agenda of the Regulation 19 document for approval until the end of July 2020. So probably 1 to 2 months after the copy deadline, we had no indication until, on both of those occasions, no indication as to the final details, the approval of the community involvement plan, for instance, by members, or even the content of the DPD by those periods. So I think that's what I'd like to cover on those 2 issues.
In relation to the lack of involvement or engagement, the Infrastructure First seem to have this problem or allegation that they've tried to get hold of you on many occasions. They've tried to have meetings. They've tried to sit down and talk to you about things. And from reading their statements, they've tried in vain. What's your side of this? How would you respond to that?
Forgive me, I would have to check through my emails, but we're not aware of any requests for any meetings to discuss anything from Infrastructure First.
So you're not aware that they may have asked you to meet with you in your offices, for example, or over Zoom during pandemic?
Not that I'm aware of. No, we haven't.
Okay. These figures of 85% not being aware, would you say that's a normal figure to be expected, because most people don't think of planning the minute they get up in the morning? Or do you think that there's something more serious than that to these figures?
I think in this instance, what we aren't aware of is the question that was put to the followers there, and of course that's it's not an issue that's been repeated anywhere else in the district. And we would look at the certainly where we've held our public exhibitions. East Streets Library was one of them, as were other towns in the towns and villages in the district, our consultation alert system, Facebook and Twitter, and the press releases are distributed fairly across the district. So we're not aware. I don't think we read too much into the figures that are presented there.
Mr. Lopez, I'll give you one last chance if there's anything else you want to come back on.
Yes, thank you, sir. And perhaps through you, if you were able to scope two answers from Mr. Marsh. First of all, that the reference, specific reference for the hypertext link in relation to dates, I'm taking that as being page 14, see section 4 of the statement of consultation. If I'm wrong about that, can he let us know?
I refer you document C1, page 23, footnote 18.
Just repeat that for me, Mr. Marsh.
Of course, that's document C1, page 23.
Page 3.
23, footnote 18. And that's a link to our press release page, specifically to the Regulation 19 one, but all of our press releases are logged on the website. Under that page, you can search for them by date, by year on there.
Thank you. Mr. Lopez, was that your only question or do you have another one?
No, certainly. The second question was, I didn't understand from Mr. Marsh whether he's querying or challenging, if you like, the figure that's being presented in our matter statement in terms of the number of those within the administrative area who were simply unaware of the Reg 18 consultation. Is he querying that figure?
A query about the number, sir. I mean, the point that was made is, first of all, we're not entirely clear about the question that was asked and all the significance of it. But it goes back to the question that you raised, which is, you know, how unusual is that? And I think it's something we are all guilty of when bump comes through our letterbox. And, you know, generally speaking, many of us are not very good at engaging with things until somebody actually points out to you that something is about to happen right on your doorstep. I mean, there's no indication of how that figure would sit within an ordinary context. I mean, on the face of it, 85%, you would say that's a lot of people and they should know, but does it in fact have that significance at all? It depends really on the extent to which people are prepared to read. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink effectively. You can provide the information, you can put it out there. Parish councils are it's there for them to disseminate information amongst their members. It's out there on media. Local communities talk. Infrastructure first. It's an organisation that it is there to disseminate information to its members. In part, this whole process relies not just on the council putting things out there, but on others discussing things and then actually taking an active role in their community. So we're not, I don't think, disputing the raw figure of 85%. The question really is one that you raised. What is the significance of that? And can you infer from that people have not in fact had the information thrust under their nose? And the answer to that question is no, you can't. I don't know whether Mr. Marsh wants to come to say anything in more in that regard.
You're welcome, Mr. Marsh, if you'd like to.
No, nothing further to add.
Right, fine. Mr. Lopez, back to you again. Are there
Thanks.
any points to what you've heard and any more questions?
Not questions as such, but observations then on the back of those two. I'm content to make the point that the council don't challenge the figure. Just wanted to be clear on that.
Yeah.
So taking into account then the run through from Mr. Marsh, what he did say in terms of the press releases, he cited Mid Sussex Times as positively having published at a given date. But in terms of the other press releases or the opportunities for a press release through the outlets, he very fairly confirmed, as we suspected, that the list that is provided within our Appendix A second email of the list of outlets is no statement, still less any evidence, that any of those outlets were actually used in order to disseminate the fact of the consultation period opening. So that the council don't go further, or there is no check, if you like, that's been performed, still less evidence that any of those outlets were used at the given time. The reference then we have for the given outlets that that were scoped is the footnote 18, page 23 reference. But so I've looked at that, and that doesn't answer the complaints and queries that we have. So they all remain on the table so far as Infrastructure First is concerned. But the last one was the acknowledgement very fairly, and I think inevitably, by Mr. Marsh in relation to Mid Sussex matters. It would have been helpful, I think is a very polite understatement in terms of that media. It was an obvious one. It has a very sizable readership. And so the question that I was posing through our representation, but it's been well flagged with the council, is why could that and should that not have been used in advance of, or simply to tip off when it has that readership, that the consultation period will open up in terms of Reg 18 and 19. And we know that neither medium or for neither period have been used. And so our query is, hopefully common sense fashion, it didn't need to chime with the periods for consultation. So there wouldn't have been any oddity about that being announced even the 3 or 4 months ahead of the consultation period for Reg 18 starting. That doesn't answer our question. So if Mr. Marsh wants a second bite at answering that, but the observation, the complaint still remains when that was glaringly in front of the council to be used. And we are bound to note that the outcome of that really has been the sizable figure that you see at our 1.5 as to those that haven't or did not know about the consultation at the relevant stage. What I would ask you to caution is to, as you'll know through your lengthy experience of these matters, is to speculate as to what was or was not notified through the door, if you like. Unless you've got the evidence base in front of you, as we see there isn't, there's simply isn't any reasonable objective basis to speculate on what people did or did not know. What we do have is the raw figures, CR 1.5, which we know this morning the council don't challenge. Thank you, sir.
I'll give the council one final right to reply on this, and then we'll move on.
Make 2 points. If Mr. Marsh thinks there's a third, he'll chip in at the end, I'm sure. So the first is that in terms of the reasons why we haven't used Mid-Sussex Matters, that's been explained by Mr. Marsh. It's a publication that comes out 3 times a year, so you will be very well aware of the pressures that local authorities are under in terms of bringing forward their development plan documents. Sadly, there is nearly always slippage, but that is not to be desired or encouraged. With respect, Mr. Lopez's suggestion that the council should have anticipated that it was going to get to a certain point, and even if it meant that it was publicised in Mid Sussex Matters a month or so before the event, I'd say it's a fanciful suggestion. First of all, it raises very real questions from the council about due process and procedure. If the council is going to print on a document which its own committee has not yet resolved should in fact be released for publication. And that's an area where any authority would be understandably cautious and careful. But in terms of Mr. Lopez's point, which is, well, at least people would know that it was coming and keep an eye out for it. In my submission, the idea that somebody is going to read something and then 2 months later still be keeping an eye open lacks any sense of reality. It might be different if this was a weekly newspaper where somebody was being told in 7 days' time, look out for it. But to expect people to keep it in the forefront of their minds for 2 or 3 months is simply unrealistic. But all of this in reality only goes to the fact that in an ideal world, Mid Sussex Matters might have been a sensible place to publish it. But that's not the question that you are addressing at this point. You're looking at legal compliance in terms of the statutory obligations to publicise each stage of the plan. We have done that. There is no obligation to publish in a particular journal or media outlet. The statement of community involvement doesn't particularly say or doesn't require us to publish in any one particular media outlet. And the question really is has what's been done fulfilled the minimum requirements? And in our submission, for reasons we've spelt out in the various documents, we've gone beyond that at a time, particularly through the pandemic, when it hasn't been easy keeping on top of everything. But we have had information available for inspection and examination, even though it wasn't strictly necessary for us to do that. It is always possible at this stage in the process to say, well, you could have done something else and it would have been a jolly good idea, or wouldn't it have been nice if you had? But we don't live in a world where you always achieve the ideal and what's what might be a nice idea. The question for you is, have we adhered to the legal requirements? And the short answer to that is yes. Mr. Marsh, did you want to add anything to that?
No, nothing more to add.
In which case, I'm going to move on swiftly to the second small question, which is on due process. So we're on to very similar ground here, and whether the council's followed this. The council stated in their document to me or to the examination, they've done this in a robust and a transparent manner, following national policy and best practice, that they've consulted with a number of key groups, important key groups. But they mention a list of those, including landowners, developers, neighbouring authorities, town and parish councils, site allocations working group, scrutiny committee. And at each stage, there has been documentation published. So there's been a high level assessment, a detailed assessment, final site selection. I'm racing through this, but it's in the notes, you can read this. And then we have a number of responses to that, and maybe we'll get a little bit more of a discussion on this. Grace Machin for both the Burgess Hill Town Council and the South of Folders Lane Action Group, SOFLAG, are saying it's not being followed. They said there have been inadequacies and inequalities in the site selection process. Again, the Infrastructure First Group, they failed to allocate sufficient land to meet residual need in line with policy DP1 of the district plan, and that they've allocated an additional high amount, over nearly 800 dwellings in East Grinstead, without allocating the employment space to go with it and causing traffic issues. Barton Wilmore, again, on their point about no suitable sites for older people identified. In Dr. Helena Griffiths, the process of site selection has not been followed with appropriate due diligence, and sites have not been considered, and she quotes the farm that she knows well, site 68 in the lists, SHELAG lists, where there's a dilapidated farm of nearly 0.75 hectares. It's not a remote rural site and should have been reappraised. Hamsland Action Group, or HAG, consider there were failures in community engagement, which have undermined confidence in the process. We've discussed the community engagement now. I'm really looking now to see whether the actual process of preparing this plan, of going through the right steps, has been undertaken properly. Is there anything that Andrew Marsh or Mr. Brown would like to say by way of introduction on this one before I bring other people in?
Yes, if I could just kick off, but just by trying to keep the conversation on the right tracks, really, because you know our answer to the question, have we adhered to due process, is yes. I've read very carefully the various statements that argue otherwise. I think in considering those, it's very important to bear in mind that we are talking about process rather than outcomes or results. I'm aware of the fact that a lot of people do not like the results of the process that we have been through, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't a due process. It is inherent in any kind of consultation that there's an obligation to listen to people, but it doesn't necessarily follow from that there is an obligation to agree with them. You, in the course of your consideration, will hear a wide range of views. You can't possibly agree with all of them, but it doesn't mean that you would not be guilty of failing to follow through due process. Reading a number of the objections, it's quite clear, it seems to me, that what a number of people are actually saying is that that we haven't come to the conclusion that they agree that they put forward, and therefore they consider we haven't been through due process. And I say at the outset that that's putting the cart before the horse. We have been through the process. We couldn't agree with everybody. We were bound to disagree with some people, but that doesn't mean the process hasn't been due.
Thank you.
And Mr. Marsh says he has nothing to add to that. So.
Right. Lucy Wilford, welcome to our proceedings. Do come in.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Apologies, I might be touching slightly on the first matter. I did put my hand up earlier, but I thought you were asking specifically about community involvement, on which I had no comments. But we did make comments on due process as well, which are to stand.
So we are now. See, you're right on.
So yes, I'm Lucy Wilford. I'm from Barton. I'm here representing retirement villages. So I think just for a bit of context, we're open with our recent appeal decision at Orval, which was our matter statements. Quite critically, the appeal decision, the inspector identifies that there's evidence of significant level of current unmet need for extra care leasehold accommodation, which will significantly increase over the planned period. And the situation has not been helped by the slow progress on this document and the failure to recognise an unmet need that is clearly evident. It's later characterised in the decision of paragraph 137 as needing considerable. The Council's adopted local plan, policy DP 25 and DP 30, directs that where a shortfall is identified for specialist accommodation, and this would include extra care provision, then it would look to this document, the daughter document, to help address that need. This is in the context that since the local plan was adopted, the NPPF has been updated and the DPG is also being reinforced. The DPG specifically now has a new section in it dealing specifically with the needs of older people. And identifies the needs of older persons being critical. It also sets out the plan's need to provide for specialist housing for older people where a need exists. As I've set out in our appeal decision, that need was established, and that was not just on our evidence, but on the Council's own evidence to that inquiry. The NPPF as well is also being enforced and now recognises that policies should reflect the need for type and tenure of different groups in the community, and that should be reflected in family policies. What we have then is up-to-date evidence which identifies the need. And contrary to the adopted local plan and national guidance, the plan continues to fail to recognise and address that need for a specialist extra care accommodation. It's clearly within the scope of this document to be able to address that need, since policies DP 25 and DP 30 specifically point to it. It's therefore contrary to its legal requirements, and the evidence the Council has prepared has misdirected the plan at the outset, which goes to our due process point, in not considering the need to address extra care accommodation as part of the evidence base or as part of the policy response.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll take Andrew Black and then we'll have a break for 20 minutes. So, Mr. Black, welcome to our proceedings.
Thank you, sir. My name is Andrew Black Consulting on behalf of Vanderbilt Homes. Just going back to process and talking through the process on a non-site specific basis, there are a number of representations in front of you that suggest that it wasn't a transparent process in terms of the site selection process that went through. You have in front of you, excuse me, 3 site selection papers that form part of the evidence base, and those in effect walk through each stage that the council went through to get to the point of which sites they were selecting. And we say, sir, that there are some inadequacies in that process that led to sites being selected that perhaps shouldn't have been. If you start with site selection process paper 1, SSP 1, and if you go in that paper to paragraph 4.4, and that sets out that the sites allocated for development in the plan will fit the pattern of growth set out in DP4 and DP6, which the council have set the whole plan around. And then it says, therefore, sites that are of a scale that are much larger than the existing settlement, or that would result in a development of a scale that would greatly exceed the indicative housing requirement for that settlement, will not be considered further at that stage. So you're well aware, sir, of what DP4 and DP6 set out, and effectively the minimum residual requirements for each settlement. If you then go to site selection paper 2, SSP 2, and within that, it's paragraph 2.10, 2.10, I want to take you to. And that sets out then the process that the council went through. And it says that in the event that one settlement cannot meet its requirements, any shortfall will need to be met in the next settlement category in the hierarchy. And it effectively says, for example, you would go through each stage. You would go through to the next settlement down. It will be passed down to settlements within category 3 and so on. And it says there, if having been through the site selection, the site assessment process, there are still insufficient sites to satisfy the settlement category requirements, it will be necessary to repeat the process. And this will involve looking again at sites that had previously been excluded or performed negatively, and seeking opportunities to overcome potential constraints and barriers to development in order to reassess them against the criteria. We say, sir, that that is close to what you're supposed to do, but not quite. And it's this point that if you look at the planning practice guidance, that says what happens if the assessment indicates that there are insufficient sites and broad locations to meet the needs, effectively to meet housing needs. And it says in the first instance, strategic policy making authorities will need to revisit their assessment, for example, to carry out a further call for sites or changing assumptions about development potential of particular sites to ensure they make the most efficient use of land. This may include applying a range of densities that reflect accessibility and potential of different areas, especially for sites in town centres, town and city centres, and other locations that are well served by public transport. And that's in our reps. I can give you the reference if you want that now. So that's paragraph 25, and the reference ID is 3-201-90722. So we say, sir, that what the council did was they had their minimum residual requirements. They looked at if those could be met within that level of the hierarchy, and where they couldn't, they went down to the next settlement hierarchy, then went down again to the next settlement hierarchy, then repeated the process. Going back to the planning practice guidance, that says in the first instance, the council will need to relook at the sites. In the first instance, they'll need to look at whether there are sites that are better served by public transport. So we say, sir, that that wasn't the right process that they went through. And then finally, just for the moment, in terms of site selection paper 3, now this is where, for me, and I think for others, it does get particularly murky in terms of how things were scored. And that sets out in paragraph 3.4.5 that any sites which scored a very negative score in part one of the considerations which were set out were not considered further. So you have a table in there. If you look at that paragraph, you've got planning constraints in part one, deliverability considerations in part two, and then sustainability and accessibility parts in part three. Now, I've looked through this and I can't see exactly what weighting was used against each of those scores and how that criteria is met. But going back again, it looks as though sustainability and accessibility was the last point that was approached on many of those, and that the planning constraints were led through in terms of what was being looked at. So we have other significant concerns around AONB and heritage. We'll probably come back to those, but in terms of the pure process of getting from site selection paper 1 to site selection paper 3, I think we can say that we're not convinced, and that's something that needs to be scrutinised further. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, we've just gone 11:30. I've noticed other hands going up, and I'll bring you in after we've broken for coffee. We'll come back 20 minutes. We'll come back at 5 to 12. So we're out of session now. Thank you. Hi,
You're in.
Charlotte. We're in.
Hello.
We'll sort that problem out at lunchtime with my access to my other documents. See how far we get with. I'm still using my hard copies, so I mean I'm following what people are saying. I'm just using paper rather than IT.
Okay. I'll help you out lunchtime.
I'll explain it more clearly later.
Okay.
Right, am I on now?
It's 11:53, but you're on.
All right, so we've got 2 minutes to go then. Right. Okay, it's 11:55. We're ready to go. So the hearings are resumed. I've got Katie Lamb, David Murray, and Judith Ashton to participate. So Katie, do you want to start?
Thank you very much. I'm Katie Lamb from DMH Stallard, and I'm representing Welbeck Strategic Land. I just want to make two fairly short but hopefully helpful comments. Firstly, Mrs. Wilford from Barton Wilmore commented on the council's obligation to provide extra care or housing for older people. And I just wanted to thank her for that comment, because obviously the plan does do that in allocating land at Imberhorn, west and south of Imberhorn Upper School at policy SA20 for mixed use development, including a care community, and that's referenced in the description of that allocation. And that's also evidenced in the site library documents as well, the concept plan, which is document SA 20.1, and documents SA 20.8 and SA 20.9. Also, although going backwards, I thought it might be quite a helpful point that Infrastructure First accused the council of not entering into meaningful dialogue with them. I'd just like to note that on their website, they publish their emails to their members. And on their email of the 27th of May this year, they commented that they were only established in August 2020. And that was at the time that the Regulation 19 consultation was going on. So it would have been very difficult for Mid Sussex to actively engage with them before that time, and obviously prior to the consultation of the Regulation 19. Those are my 2 points. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. David Murray. In fact, I've mispronounced you, haven't I? You're David Murray something.
Good morning, sir. David Murray Cox, it is.
That's it. Sorry.
From Turley on behalf of A2 Dominion.
Right.
Thank you. Just a couple of points on the site selection issue. And again, without being site specific too much, hopefully. The first issue, back in site selection paper 1, I think it's paragraph 4.2 of that document, is that sites were discounted at an early stage for what we say are arbitrary reasons, The first reason given, and it's not quite clear which or whether both apply to specific sites, is the issue of connectivity to existing settlements. Now, there were sites discounted at that stage, which are within 150 metres of the existing settlement as defined on the current proposals map. But in any event, now directly adjoin recent developments and would directly adjoin the edge of settlements as proposed to be defined by the council on the new policies map. And you can't have it both ways. Either the site is not well connected to the settlement or it is. And we say that there were sites that were discounted that are well connected. The second issue is that the council discounted sites allegedly because they were greater than was required for the indicative minimum figures, for example, given in the, I think it's table to policy DP6 and the supporting text. The point there that we make in our statements is that those are indicative requirements. They are not maximum requirements that must be applied with full force. And there are a number of instances where the council diverge from that approach in any event, both upwards and downwards, for example, by directing additional growth to settlements where there's no residual requirement, or alternatively, not directing growth to a settlement where there is a residual requirement. But the third point we make in our statements, particularly matter 3, is that there's no analysis of whether there's any justification for a different approach to be adopted in this site allocations document, for example, to meet the needs of other authorities, particular ones in this case being Crawley and Brighton. In the case of Crawley, we now know that there's a continuing and growing unmet need, and it's not out with the realms of this plan, as we say, for the council either to have directed additional growth, bearing in mind the housing requirement overall is a minimum figure, but also to have directed what it plans for in any event in a spatial sense to assist those authorities. And there's just one other point, sir, that I thought would be helpful to make. In the site allocations document that I've accessed this morning on the local authorities website, it says Appendix B is a table of residual requirements and what's left still to be provided at each settlement. That's not what Appendix B contains. Appendix B looks to be a monitoring table, but I can't find the information that I was expecting to see in Appendix B.
Thank you. We'll raise that with the council in a minute. Thank you for that. Judith Ashton, welcome to our proceedings.
Good morning, sir. Nice to see you. Just a process point, really, I wanted to make. Andrew Black earlier referred to paragraph 210 of the spatial strategy paper. If you go to paragraph 7.27 of TB3, the topic paper, you'll see that there is a totally different approach being adopted, in as much as paragraph 210 refers to the fact that the authority will look to meet the shortfall in the next settlement in the category moving down, whereas in paragraph 7.27 of the topic paper, it refers to the fact that if insufficient sites have been identified in any particular tier to meet the indicative number to be given in the supporting text of DP6, allocations will be made at the settlement in the more sustainable category 1 settlement. So there seems to be mixed messages in exactly what the process was the authority were looking to pursue in terms of the allocation strategy within the different settlement hierarchy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Helena Griffiths. Hello, Dr. Griffiths. Can you hear me? I think you're still muted.
There we are.
That's better. I can hear you now as well as see you.
It's all a learning experience.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah,
I'd just like to address the council on their comments that they've made and add a few points in. So the council said that a lot of the comments made by people about this issue of following due process were actually addressing omitted sites. I'd like to highlight the fact that Mid Sussex have actually dismissed in several occasions the omission of sites and the reason for omission of sites. And one site in particular that, as you've alluded to, I'm very knowledgeable on, is a site in Horsted Canes. I'd just like to ask council how they actually expect me as a layman to show the process hasn't been followed without using that as an example, because that is the example I know intimately. Of the process, just to highlight the process itself where I think it's gone wrong, trying not to use too many pieces for that site in particular, but I do question the robustness of the site selection process prior to the sustainability assessments. The example I used actually omits a previously developed site, farm building site, which is proximal to the built up area boundary, and it actually allocates in its place medieval green fields. That is of note because this site is within the AONB. So I would protest that actually sustainability wise, you should be considering sites which have previously developed land over green fields in this occasion. The site was actually dismissed and that was following us actually making corrections to the site pro formas that were sent out. Those corrections were not actually ever addressed by Mid Sussex. And so the documents that went out to Regulation 18 continued to hold those incorrect information. That incorrect information was actually a quantitative piece of information regarding land ownership and access. It was not qualitative. So according to Mid Sussex's process, that should have been corrected, but was not corrected prior to Regulation 18. As noted in my statement, it was corrected 3 times with Mid Sussex, but no amendments to those documentations or the assessments were made prior to Regulation 18. In Regulation 18, it actually states that the site was not suitable for allocation. Having read through the documentation, that terminology should be used had the Part 1 criteria actually been scored very negatively in any of the elements. None of those elements were actually scored very negatively, yet the site was was not selected. That included the incorrect information. The incorrect information was actually a criteria 2 part rather than a criteria 1 part. So I feel that the site has actually not been selected on because the due process has not been followed. I think the sifting of sites has actually been very premature to sift out a previously developed site, given that the development plan sustainability objective number 7 actually states that it wants to high grade previously developed sites, and also DP4 in the plan is promoting brownfield sites. The reassessment of sites between Regulation 18 and Regulation 19 could have actually resulted in the sustainability assessment being done on the site in particular, and that could have actually led to it being considered a realistic alternative. The realistic alternative that was used within the village itself was actually a contrived subset of one of the existing sites that has been allocated. So as a whole, the process I do not feel has been followed. If you've got any more questions, I'm happy to answer them. Sorry, it's in a bit layman's terms, but yeah,
Fine.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll bring John Litton in, or is it Lord Litton?
Thank you very much, sir. Can you hear me all right?
I can.
Yes, John Litton will do fine, because although I have a title, I don't use it professionally. So I wonder if I can sort of throw some light on this. Firstly, I don't want to sort of repeat anything that I have put in already, and participants will know that I represent the interests of a group of 11 landowners who, between them, own the Crabbit Park area. Now, I think I need to start, almost go to the end before I start the beginning. If I can sort of draw your attention to page 126 of the Council's sustainability analysis of August 2016, and I do apologise, I'm not a planner, I'm a charter surveyor, but I don't normally get involved with planning things, and I don't know the actual formal reference for that, but it was August 2016. And I think that sort of sets the scene, because it actually sets reasons why certain sites were excluded. And it says there are expected to be negative impacts from, and it lists certain sites by their reference notation, predominantly due to their location. It goes on to say these sites may be to the detriment of existing towns and villages of mid-Sussex by providing a workforce of bleak employment opportunities away from these areas where a need exists. This may in turn discourage regeneration of town and village centres within the district. End of quote. Now, seen in that context, this is therefore a plan, a priori for mid-Sussex district, almost as a stand alone in terms of accretion of development in its main settlements and the communities as they are at present. Now, in one sense, this is sticking up for mid-Sussex, a point so you made right at the beginning of today's session, and I entirely accept that. But it doesn't ask the question, which is, where is the optimal place for people to live, work and socialise? But rather poses the question, where do we want people to live and work to consolidate our municipal village of the district's future? And those aren't the same thing, nor are they conducive to convergent outcomes. So that, I feel, is one of the starting points. So seen in terms of the district council's vision, if that's what it is, the locations for new development could be seen as being driven by predetermined goals, and quite possibly informed by such things as the Coastal Capital LEP study, but all the same predetermined. So it follows, and it's just been mentioned by others, that unmet need from, say, Crawley could legitimately be provided for in East Grinstead or Burgess Hill in priority to other considerations, including the daily migration pattern, social affinities and cultural focus. And I'd simply query this application of the whole approach, and whether in fact the analyses that are in the various matrices in that sustainability analysis of August 2016 really hold good. Now, Mr. Murray Cox raised a point that I'd like to follow up on, and because what goes on then subsequently is an initial core sift of sites, which, despite all those matrices and all the numerous characteristics that the council set out to prepare in deciding whether it was going to adopt or reject things through the sustainability process, and it was a very broad spectrum of different criteria. It seems ultimately to have boiled down to one spatial measure of connectivity, namely whether a site lay within or outside of 150 metres as measured from an existing settlement. Now, this seems to have produced some strange results within individual settlements, where what on the face of it appear to be more coherent sites seem to have been rejected in favour of some stricter interpretation, but then in some cases appears to have been abandoned or ignored. So I think there's been less than consistent analysis at work here. Plus, in the context of the site where I'm particularly concerned, I challenge the very basis of using that sort of measurement strategy to decide on that type of development approach. So I invite you, sir, to view the proposed development, especially in the north of the district, some with known logistical and transportation issues, to decide for yourself whether the process that led to the selection of sites and the rejection of others actually is dealt with on an objective way. It might, I would suggest, go some way to explaining why nature conservation, traffic and socio-economic criteria seem in some eyes, to have been accorded lesser weight than might otherwise have been the case. And I just think that there may be an element of cognitive bias that I've referred to. But of course, that's for you to determine whether that matters at this stage, whether anything can be done about it or should be done about it. And in that sense, what steps for the future should be demanded or not of the district council. Now, there's another potential example of this where I think a sort of a bias has crept in. Or should I say, things that would normally be prevent or get in the way of sustainability have perhaps been glossed over. For instance, in the connection with the Burgess Hill Northern Arc, some significant infrastructure has to be completed up front. Yet known issues in the north of the district affecting the A264, and particularly between Felbridge and junction 10 of the N23, can seemingly be deferred. I freely admit that 3,500 homes at Burgess Hill is a different order of magnitude, but the environmental and sustainability issues on the A264 are already current and pressing. I would just say this, and this is probably taking us sort of perhaps too far into the modern scenario. I do think the entire way in which we plan for sustainable and resilient communities has changed with the pandemic, and people's work-life balance has shifted material. I quite accept it wouldn't be fair to require a 2016 document to be rewritten every time some major event occurs, but I think it must be regarded as a test of DPD's own resilience and future proofing. So I was, before we started today, I'm going to suggest a line-by-line commentary on the 2016 sustainability, but I'm not going to do that because I think I've probably set the scene sufficiently for you to be able to work out for yourself and why I'm here representing a group of landowners who think that a particularly important site within the district has been overlooked in what I say, rather a strange and inconsistent manner. But I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you for your explanation. Just to explain my remit, perhaps a little bit more detail. My job is to look at the plan as submitted and see whether that plan is sound. If that plan, in my view, needs additional sites to make it sound, then that will be the next stage, and that will be indicated in some sort of communication with the council and with everybody else. So for the time being, I'm not going to be going into looking at other sites, but it may be in the fullness of time, depending on what transpires, that I may need to come back and look at them. So I hope that helps on that. Moving on, Graham Green QC.
Good afternoon, sir. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Thank you very much, sir. Graham Key, Queen's Counsel. I'm instructed, sir, on behalf of Decora Southern Limited and Waterford Trading Co Limited, who jointly promote the land north of the A2300 for the Science and Technology Park, as you know. So very briefly, in relation to your question 1.1 Roman 2, we consider that Mid Sussex has followed due process in preparation of the plan, including in relation to site selection and public involvement. And so the reason I'm putting my hand up at this stage is we've heard quite a bit already about housing sites and selection. And I just wanted to drop in at this point, without getting into site specifics, that Mid Sussex's process in relation to the site selection of employment sites, including the STP, which is fully summarised in their document SSP4, it is based on a comprehensive evidence base underpinning the allocations, and that has been subject to considerable scrutiny, not just by Mid Sussex District Council, but also by all relevant stakeholders. So, for example, in particular, in the case of the STP, West Sussex County Council's Highways Authority, Highways England, and the Environment Agency, etc., resulting in no objections from any prescribed body in relation to the STP. So a robust process there. And so just very briefly on public involvement, I'm not going to stray back on the conversation that we have already been through in relation to the first issue before the break, and I endorse Mid Sussex's observations in relation to consultation, but I would also remind you, sir, and I know you obviously be well aware of it, that the considerable volume of representations in response to both the Regulation 18 and Regulation 19 stages of the plan itself demonstrates the extent of public involvement and the degree of engagement that has taken this to this point. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for that. Right, I wonder if I could bring the council back to give me their view on a number of the messages that have been given this morning.
Thank you, sir.
Basically, you've been accused of giving mixed messages in your process for site selection. And I'd like your take on that, including an element of cognitive bias. I'm not looking at sites objectively, and I say I'm having mixed messages. So is this Andrew Marsh or is this Paul Brown?
Well, sir, I'm going to, would it help, sir, if I sort of acted as ringmaster and delegated questions out to my team to pick up the various points that have been made?
That would be very helpful, very helpful.
Well, so just on the point that you've raised and the words cognitive bias, which I know came from Lord Lytton's presentation. So that really does go back to the point that I made at the outset, that there's a huge difference between disliking the outcome of a process and a contention that due process has not been followed. Inevitably, people will disagree with the results. That it goes with the territory, but that does not mean that process has not been followed. And in that regard, I'm grateful to Mr. Keane for his kind comments. This has been, on any analysis, it's a rigorous process. We've been through, there is an evidence base that supported it. We have site selection criteria. The application of those has been vetted independently, not just looked at by council officers. People may well disagree, but we have certainly been through the process of asking members of the public, stakeholders, what their views are, and taking those on board, making changes where we felt that they were relevant and necessary, but not where we disagreed. So if I can pick up on particular points that have been made. Firstly, Ms. Wilford, in relation to particularly C2 needs. So I'm still struggling, and I don't mean this unkindly, but I'm genuinely struggling to understand how what has been said under that heading fits under the category of due process. I understand there is an argument about whether the plan properly meets the needs for C2 accommodation. And that's a matter that I know we're going to come back to tomorrow, main matter 2. And it may be more appropriate to deal with it there. But at the moment, it's not clear to me how this is a due process issue. But at this stage, I'm going to point to Mr. Tunnell, perhaps just to ask him to run through, in summary, points we may need to come back to tomorrow by way of reply to Ms. Wilford.
Okay, good afternoon. I just make a number of points in relation to C2. I make them having been a participant in all the inquiries into C2 since the district plan. The first is the suggestion is that we've not addressed C2 and in particular we've not allocated site. I'd make the first point that both the practice guidance and the MPPF invites authorities to consider how the needs are met, and it's for local authorities to decide what the appropriate approach to meeting that need is. But the point I'd make is that the site allocations document doesn't turn its back. We have, as Ms. Lamb pointed out, included provision at Imberhorn, and any of the other sites that are proposed for allocation could be suitable for care purposes. And then the final point I'd just make is that in terms of the extent of need, the need identified by the inspector at Albourne, which was in September 2020, the decision, which was after the completion of the Reg 19 consultation, was in relation to the relatively narrow category of extra care leasehold older person's housing, which is no less important, but it is a relatively narrow category. It has not, and we acknowledge that, but it's not been possible in the context of the current site allocation plan to undertake the kind of comprehensive assessment that would be expected on this issue. And it's a matter we're picking up in the review of the district plan.
And so I could just add to that. I mean, of course, we have looked at the various sites that have been put forward in relation to C2 by C2 providers, and Ms. Wilford's clients aren't the only people in that regard, as you will know. I mean, we haven't rejected those sites because they were being put forward for C2. We've rejected them for other reasons based on the normal sustainability appraisal approach. So, you know, when Mr. Tunnell says we haven't turned our back on C2 provision, to the extent that people have come forward with specific sites, we have looked at those, but we've given reasons for not including them. And of course, so on the question of need, necessarily the Albourne decision is the most recent one, but you would have picked up from our topic paper 4 that it's not the only appeal decision. Prior to that, one of your colleagues had actually found in the council's favour on question of need. And as Mr. Tunnell says, Albourne is necessary. It's not a criticism of it, but it is necessarily focused on a particular aspect of the need. And the council will pick that up. The council, as you know, you'll have seen from topic paper 4, it's in the process of reviewing the overall need for specialist accommodation. Not possible to deal with that in this site allocations plan, but will be picked up in the district plan. So turning to Mr. Black's comments, and I think this is an area where it's suggested that we're sort of sending out mixed messages. Mr. Black says, well, we haven't actually followed the PPG because in areas where we've found that we can't meet the identified need at a particular level in the tier of settlements, he says we should at that stage have gone back and reviewed everything, and he relies on that passage in the PPG, one that starts in the first instance. So I think the first point to make about that is that if you go back to the PPG, it is very, very clear that when it invites authorities to go back and revisit their approach when they can't meet needs, the PPG is talking about a situation where the local authority has been through, identified what sites are available at all levels, and then cannot meet the global need that has been identified. What the PPG is not doing is suggesting that you take that approach and apply it at a tier by tier category settlement level. And so that's important because the council has not got to a point where it has found that it cannot meet the overall need. It's true that in relation to some of the categories, it hasn't been able to do what's indicated in the table that goes with policy DP4, which is indicative. But it has managed to meet that need elsewhere. So we are not actually in territory indicated by the PPG, where we need to go back and start all over again. Mr. Black also refers to paragraph 2.43 of the site selection paper 2, which talks about what the council would do if we couldn't meet the need in, for example, category 2. And so it's right to note that in that site selection paper, it does say, and I'm not quite sure why it does say that if you can't meet the need in category 2, you would then go down to category 3. So that point, and it is an error, it is not the approach the council has taken, but that error was picked up and corrected in the site selection paper 3, and you'll see there paragraph 2.4.5, where the approach that the council has taken is
just give me that reference again. Sorry to cut across you. What was the reference again?
Site selection paper 3, and it's paragraph 2.4.5. And you'll see there, sir, that what it does is it corrects it, because what the original reference should have said, if you can't meet in category 3, you move up to category 2. At all stages in this process, rather than shunting things further down the line to less sustainable settlements, the council's starting point, which is entirely consistent with national policy, has been to try and meet needs at more sustainable and higher level settlements. And so that is why, as you know, we have the complaints from, for example, SOCLAG in relation to the levels of provision that are made in Burgess Hill, because we have sought to push the need up rather than down the chain. And so I think that hopefully also picks up a point that was made by Judith Ashton. So that's what we've done, and in our submission that's entirely clear. Mr. Marsh, was there something, I think there was a last point that Mr. Black had just in relation to weighting of the scores and some concerns about the AONB. Mr. Marsh, did you wish to comment on that?
Yes, thank you. It was regarding the weighting of the criteria in setting out in Site Selection Paper 2. You'll notice in Site Selection Paper 2 that for the environmental considerations, the first set of criteria, the most severe score, shall we say, is a dark red, and our methodology was that we would remove sites on the process if they had a dark red score under that set of criteria. As you move further down through the criteria to the developability and then the sustainability, you notice they can't get a score of dark red because the council considered that the equivalent, say, of a severe impact on the AONB or flood risk was not comparable to a site being, for instance, 20 minutes walk from a bus stop. That's not what the NPPF places weight on. The NPPF places weight on a lot of the environmental considerations. And so our scoring system set out in Site Selection Paper 2 and then carried forward into Site Selection Paper 3 reflects that. It's weighted by the scoring and the performance against the indicators that are within each of the criteria.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. And then just picking up on two other contributions, Mr. Murray Cox raised a complaint about connectivity. So again, I go back to the point about due process. The council's been very clear about its methodology here. The basis on which connectivity was assessed was set out very clearly in methodology. It's been applied consistently. What in essence Mr. Murray Cox is complaining about is the fact that I don't think he suggests that if one looked at the settlement boundaries as they were at the point when the assessment was made, his site was within 150 metres. His point is that we've allocated the site or land that is between his site and the old settlement boundary, so that if you move the settlement boundary out to where it is now, he would be within, his site would be within 150 metres. Well, with respect, sir, that's a complaint about the methodology rather than a complaint about due process. The methodology was consulted on very, very widely. And in this instance, there's a very good reason why one would take that approach. Over a period of years, over many different development plans, it's inevitable that settlements will move out sequentially, but you don't leapfrog a particular site or assume that it's going to be allocated in order to allocate one that is even further out in the first place. If it had been the case that having allocated the site that is between Mr. Murray Cox's client's land and the settlement boundary, we still hadn't met the need overall, there may have been some logic in going out a little further. But if we don't reach that stage, then there's a perfectly logical reason why we don't look to his site in the first place. And then finally, sir, in relation to John Litton's observations, I'm going to ask Mr. Marsh to comment on this and possibly correct me if I've got it wrong. But so you will have appreciated already, Crabbit Park, as it's being discussed, is a very large site. At the last of the district plan, it was promoted as a strategic site, and one can understand that when you realise that its potential capacity of around 2,500 homes. On any analysis, that is, it was appropriately a matter for the district plan. It was considered at the district plan stage as a strategic site and rejected. And in terms of the site allocations DPD, we are not looking for a single site of that scale anywhere in order to meet the distribution that's indicated in DP4. And there may be, heaven only knows, there may be a day when Crabbit Park comes back into the frame in the context of a new and revised district plan, but it's not appropriate for the site allocations DPD to be opening that box at the moment. Mr. Marsh, did you want to come in?
Just to say that, yeah, it was a rejected site during the district plan, rejected in the SA, which is what Mr. Litton has referred to alongside the district plan, and therefore it was rejected at this stage in site selection paper 1 on this basis, on the virtue of its size and not being compliant with the strategy, because to be compliant with the strategy, it would have been included within the district plan during that consideration.
Thanks, sir.
Right, thank you for that. Judith Ashton, you've got your hand up. Do you want to come back?
Thank you, sir. Just very quickly, I'm thankful to Mr. Brown just for trying to clarify the position on the spatial strategy and the methodology. But sir, I would invite you to go back to the topic paper, and in particular page 27, which sets out the meeting district plan strategy and actually sets out the evolution between site selection process in site selection papers 2 and 3. It doesn't suggest that the terminology in site selection paper 2 was inaccurate or a mistake. It purely moves from one strategy advocating one hierarchical process to another, which is totally the opposite. And with all respect, I don't actually think the point I raised has been addressed either within the evidence base or within what you've just been told.
And I'll take the others and I'll come back to the council. Thank you for that. So Lucy Wilford.
Morning again. Yes, two quick points. Well, one, the appeal decision for Albourne came out during the Reg 19 consultation. I think it was suggested it came after, but it was actually during the consultation. The point that was made about the process points. The simple point is there's a identified need for specialist accommodation. This fails to be recognised in the sustainability appraisal and infrastructure delivery plan, something which policy DP 25 in the adopted local plan points to.
Sorry, you've gone mute. Can't hear you.
I'm not on mute.
Right, I certainly missed the last minute or so of your wisdom.
Beg your pardon?
So I missed the last minute of your wisdom.
The last minute, oh goodness. I assume we got to the point then, obviously the appeal decision had already come out during the Reg 19.
That, yeah, I got still the identified need for specialist accommodation that's not been met in the plan, that point.
Yes, it was.
Anything after that I haven't got.
No, it's fine. It was to the due process point. And it was simply that the sustainability appraisal and infrastructure delivery plan failed to recognise the need to meet the need for extra care accommodation. And in doing so, it is not considered, and there's no qualitative assessment of the sort of development that is coming forward. I don't want to stray too much into kind of matter 3 issues, but there are reasons why these forms of accommodation can't keep with main residential sites. And
that's a helpful point. We'll keep the discussion for the future on matter 3. Yeah.
And then my last point was Mr. Tunnell mentioned towards the end that the council was unable to undertake assessment of need. I'm not just unclear on why that is the case when they have 2 policies that will direct the council to do that as part of this process.
Thank you. I'll bring David Murray-Cox in now.
Thank you, sir. Just a quick point to clarify something which I said. I did make the point that sites were discounted despite being within 150 metres of the settlement boundary on the adopted proposals map. But the supplementary point to that was that there's already intervening development between that boundary and my client's site, which is going to be in the new settlement boundary. That's simply it. Thank you.
Mr. Black.
Thank you, sir. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Great. So just to respond from what Mr. Brown was saying in terms of the process and going back up the settlement hierarchy, obviously following on from what Judith Ashton was saying, and just to put a marker down, really, we're going to address these points under matter 3 on the proposed distribution of homes and not wanting to move ahead. But if that was the process and you're being told that a process was followed, we say, sir, well, don't fall for it, because if that was the process that undertook, we will take you to the fact that under the distribution of housing, and when you look in the top hierarchy, the category 1 of the settlement hierarchy, when you look at the homes that are provided in there, you have 1,409 dwellings that are allocated in category 1. 612 of those are in Burgess Hill. That's 43%. 772 are in East Grinstead. That's 55%. When you look at Haywards Heath, it's just 25. There's 2%. So I think, again, I am hearing mixed messages come through in terms of that process. And again, the outcome of that process, absolutely, I take it for granted what Mr. Brown says, that not everyone is going to like the outcome of that process. But that outcome was so skewed that there has to be questions around what happened there. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, well, if the council can help me, Paul Brown, you've not changed some minds at least on this.
Surprise, sir.
Yeah, there are still some out. How can I put it? There's the point on specialist accommodation and why we weren't in a position to undertake need. We can look at the settlement. In fact, these questions are all ones that really will come up under matter 3.
Well, so that was going to be my response, is to suggest that probably we could pick. I mean, I'll be happy to try and deal with them now, but we will be going back over them later on, and it may be more sensible to deal with it then.
The only one now, I think, is this question about has there been a change of tack or not between the first paper and the second paper on settlement on allocations, and did you, in fact, make it clear that you'd gone wrong in the first one, or as Judith Ashton has hinted, there's no indication of that, and in fact you've just you've tacked course like a sailing vessel.
Well, so Mr. Marsh is trying to signal to me what he thinks I should say, and it's going to be far easier if I just let him answer the question for you.
Right, Mr. Marsh.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's evident in what we're allocating, in that the process has been that we would look to allocate the majority development, because that's the district plan strategy, the most sustainable settlements, and that's category 1, followed by 2, and then BRE down to 5. That's evident by, as you'll see in SA10, which we'll discuss in more detail tomorrow, no doubt. The distribution of housing follows that very closely. So therefore, I think it's obvious that if there is a shortfall, we should be looking at more sustainable settlements rather than least sustainable, and that's what we've done.
Okay, thank you for that.
So just, I mean, we will come back to it, but just picking up on Mr. Black's last contribution, I'm sure it's something you already have in mind, but can I ask you, please, to bear in mind that when we are looking at questions of an equitable distribution, as between, for example, Burgess Hill and Haywards Heath and East Grinstead, one needs to bear in mind that what the site allocation DPD is doing is only a small part of the overall picture. because of course quite a lot is done in the district plan itself. There have also been in the period between the district plan and the site allocations DPD a number of permissions granted, some of them for sites not allocated. Therefore, if one wants to see what the true balance is between Burgess Hill, East Grinstead and Haywards Heath, one needs to look at the whole of that picture and not just at the last remaining allocations in this particular plan. But so we can pick that, I'll put that marker down now, but we can come back to it on another day.
Thank you. That's helpful. If there are no more comments on due process, I hold my breath. No. Then we'll move on to the scope of the plan, which is 1.2. And I basically give a brief summary there of what I consider the scope of the plan to be. And I accept fully the point that was made to me when I first suggested this. It is not a question, but hopefully it's a bit of scene setting. And the question is, the little one underneath that, is the scope of the plan in line with the main aims and strategy of the district plan, including I'll set out in the executive summary and in relation to its main aims. The council's comment is that DP4 sets the strategy for this plan, and that this plan is consistent with that strategy. And the council then helpfully, in fact, identify the 4 aims to keep in mind. So it's obviously allocating sufficient housing to meet the residual, and employment land likewise, to allocate a specific site for the Science and Technology Park, and finally additional policies necessary to deliver sustainable development, which I think are the 34 to 38 at the end, SA 34 to 38. And in response to that, Grace Makin for Burgess Hill and Soflag say the main aims are too limited, that there's a critical balance protecting the environment and natural assets, which is of high importance, which it is stating is ignored in these aims. Then Vale Williams have contributed at this stage, saying the scope of the plan is in line with the main aims, and they're looking in particular at the Science and Technology Park. Then Nexus for Mill Homes state that the DPD fails to provide a sufficient buffer against the district plan requirement, to ensure the plan incorporates flexibility and robustness against the non-implementation of allocated sites. And they suggest a buffer of 10%. Again, something we're going to come back to in matter 3. So I'm not courting too much discussion on that now. Then Bolton Wilmore, that the plan does not align itself with the aims and strategy of the district plan. And again, they refer me to the whole thing about specialist accommodation and care homes, and what the district plan DP30 says about that, and the Aldbourne appeal, which we've heard mentioned a couple of times this morning. Then Turley, acting for QA2 Dominion, that really drawing my attention to the needs of neighbouring authorities that we've again touched on this morning, that feel or are telling me that the wider spatial planning issue does not appear to have taken this into account, even though they say that district plan policies DP 30 and 31 appear to commit the DPD to explore opportunities in Northwest Sussex housing market area, for example. I'll go through all of these just briefly. Strutton Parker for Summerston Development Projects Limited. Again, do not agree that the plan meets the main aims of the district plan, fails to address the need for specialist housing. So again, making that point. Hamsland Action Group, that there's a conflict of interest they are accusing the council of in policy SA 29. And they are saying that the council are basically standing to realise a windfall gain, which they say is around £2 million, and that's influenced them. Don't shoot the postman. I'm just saying what's been written down. It's in the public domain. That's what they've said. And then the infrastructure first group are saying that some of the sustainability objects are conflicting in relation to sites SA19 and SA20 to promote a place attractive to a full range of businesses and opportunities to live and work within their communities. Interesting to see what a definition of a community is in that sense. But they're saying there isn't a balance there. Parker Dan are saying that there's not an open-ended scope in this plan to set out additional strategic policies to co-sustainable development. A JLL for weight development, that there's an evident shortfall of housing. Again, we're getting back to category 2 and 3 settlements across the district. And that's different to what was set out in DP 6, I think it is. And also, I think it's the first time this point's been mentioned, but it will come up a lot, I'm sure. A claim by JLL for weights development that the plan is overly reliant on large sites and strategic sites, despite the availability of suitable residential sites. And they say in places like Linley and Bolney. So it doesn't accord with paragraph 35 of MPPF and therefore should not be adopted. So quite a lot there. Maybe the council could come in first, and then other people do feel free to make your points and elaborate on what I've very briefly said, you said, which may not entirely tally with what you feel are the most important points that you said. So I'll give you all the opportunity of putting me right on that. But let's start with the council.
So I think you've summarised our position succinctly but admirably and accurately, and it's also spelled out in our main matter response. I mean, you've identified a number of distinct points there. I think it will probably be more helpful for us to hear what other people want to say, expanding on what they've said in their representations, and we'll come back. But at the moment, in global terms, and this goes back to the point that I made in opening, so this is a daughter document. Its scope is defined by the district plan. And we believe, well, the district plan is very clear about the level of allocations that are needed, bearing in mind delivery and commitments since that. We have allocated not just sufficient, but more than sufficient residential sites in order to make up that gap. On that basis, we say we are squarely within the scope of the district plan. I know there's a discussion to be had about policies 34 to 38, about whether those are truly within the scope of the plan. Our position is very clearly that they are. And certainly if they are not, it's not our intention that they should be going broader than the remit of the district plan. But I think it's probably easier just to hear why other people disagree with that. So thank you.
Thank you for that. We'll carry on for a few minutes. We're going to break sometime around 1 or just after. Maybe Dr. Ashley Bowes, are you succinct enough to fill in that sort of 7 or 8 minute gap for us?
I won't be, but Mr. Grace, who will be speaking on this point, he doesn't have the raise hand function, I'm sure will be. But just to introduce myself, I'm Ashley Bowes and I'm representing Burgess Hill Town Council and the SOFLAG group. And I'd like to bring in Mr. Grace, planning consultant, who's going to respond on this point with your permission.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Nick Grace of Grace Machin Planning and Property on behalf of Burgess Hill Town Council and South of Folders Lane Action Group. I normally only have 3 minutes to speak, so hopefully 7 will be enough. We say no, the scope of the plan is not in line with the main aims of the district plan. It does not satisfactorily take into account the impact upon the environment. It is our belief that the main aims identified are far too limited, far too narrow in their scope to reflect the wider requirements of the district plan. particularly in relation to the need to protect important landscape settings and environmental assets. Indeed, the strategic objectives of the district plan are identified within Chapter 2. The very first theme being protecting and enhancing the environment. Something one can arguably cross-reference with the Burgess Hill Neighbourhood Plan and paragraph 2.11, where it states that the district plan seeks to strongly protect the countryside to the west and south of Burgess Hill. Returning to the district plan, under a number of strategic objectives, one is to promote the well-located development which ensures valued landscapes are protected for their visual, their historical, and for their biodiversity values. The district plan seeks to protect landscapes and environmental assets of national importance, including the South Downs National Park through policy DP 18. And it's really on this basis that to ourselves it's clear that Mid-Sussex do want to protect the environment. It seems imperative that this therefore should be included as a main aim of the DPD. Unfortunately, sir, currently this DPD solely appears to focus on the delivery of development and appears to place rather little weight on matters of environmental significance. And as you just mentioned, there is a critical balance where the protection of the environment has been ignored within the aims of the DPD. And so therefore, we have to argue that these strategic aims must be broadened to reflect the strategic aims of the district plan. And as we will talk, I'm sure, in sessions to come, significantly in respect of the setting of the South Downs National Park. I don't know if I have a minute left, but I have nothing further to add at this stage, sir. Thank you very much.
That was commendably succinct. Thank you for that. I'll take one more brief observation if there is one. Or are you all keeping your powder dry for this afternoon? Tondra Tom, do come in.
Hello, Mr. Fox. Tondra Tom.
Hello, we meet again.
We do indeed. Thank you. On behalf of Fairfax today, and it was just to start off, and I'd like to come back in again after lunch. But I noticed, and you refer to this in the council's matter statement 1, and indeed in the intro to the SADPD topic paper 3. The words strategic policies, which were capitalised in the submission plan and the Reg 19 plan, the word strategic has been removed, and it's just to set out additional policies necessary. Now, I wonder if that is an intentional change. I can't find any modification to support it. So I wonder if this is an interesting telling point, or whether that's just a typographical error. But obviously the submitted plan, as I read aim 4, is to set out additional strategic policies necessary to deliver sustainable development. And we would say that that does not flow from the district plan, has no policy hook in the district plan. Aims 1 to 3 clearly flow from DP1 and DP4. But we can't see a policy hook for such a broad, unlimited scope as to set out additional strategic policies within this plan.
Thank you. That was very brief. Thank you very much. I'll give you a chance this afternoon.
Thank you.
To come back for more. It is just coming up to 1. We will close now and we'll return at 2 o'clock. Thank you.
So may we just remind you that the participants would need to use the PM link. We need to close this session.
We need to close this one now. Okay, we close this and then we come in again on the new link this afternoon. Yeah. Thank you for that. Charlotte? You still there?
Yes, I am.